Well, thank you everybody for coming. The last session of what's been a very, very busy day. And this session is one very, very dear to my heart. I'm Claire. I head up technology and audio at Little Red. A lot of you know who I am. If you don't know who I am, I was a journalist for many years before going into PR, and I consider myself an evangelist for better quality audio because, to paraphrase the song, music was my first love and it will be my last. And the emotional experience I get from listening to music on a good system is something that every day in every way just makes my life better. And I want more people to have that experience and share that experience. And I think a lot of people who grew up in the so-called golden age of hi-fi, who were used to having hi-fi in the house as maybe their main means of entertainment, or just with a small TV, and then, you know, we've got all these other things on our time, and where almost every other industry, technology-wise, has been about increasing, getting better quality, 4K, 8K. Music has stayed fairly static for the mainstream, and especially for younger generations. And I don't think it's just about money. There's a lot of money being spent on gig tickets, on experiences, but not necessarily on reliving that experience and getting closer to the artists you love by having high quality audio, either a higher quality streaming service or a higher quality audio product in your life, whether that be something mobile that you can take with you or something that you enjoy at home. And I think there are many, many reasons why, but we're here today to discuss how we can get people having the same passion and enthusiasm for high quality audio as they might do for improving the life in any other way, whether that be food, something they buy at home, or even that all that money they're spending on gigs and that amazing experience they have, and realizing that they can have a slice of that every day in their life. So here to discuss this with me, and I'm going to go not in that order, but in the order that people are sitting. Charlie Henderson, who's Chief Commercial Officer at Cambridge Audio. James Fleury, who's a marketing strategist in the music industry, has a lot of opinions. Good. Sean, who's a lot of you know, is a freelance journalist that writes a lot of music reviews, but also presents the Made a Music podcast as well. Does a great job interviewing artists, and again is someone that I've spent more hours than I can think of talking about music with, mostly disagreeing with his choices, but that's another thing. Rachel Silton is marketing and acquisition for Cobuzz, which again is the music streaming service that has the highest range of high quality music available to stream and also to download. And Sam Willings is joining us from his Features Editor of Music Tech, but Sam is also joining us as the only Gen Z actually on this panel. Yeah. So actually representing his entire generation, so no pressure there at all. So my first question is basically, can you remember the first time you heard music sound better, the music you love sound better, and realised that there was a better quality musical experience out there? You know, can you remember that, what effect that had on you and how it changed the way you wanted to listen to music? What was your moment that you realised there was something better out there? I'll start and go with Mr. Randall.
All right, I'll kick off. I do remember it. I remember it crystal clear. I've been in and around consumer electronics for about 25 years, and I've had some weird roles. I've worked at places like Skull Candy, you know, super mainstream audio, cool stuff. And that, for me, that was normal. That's what I thought music was. And I think that's what a lot of people think music is, and it's probably kind of, for me, sets the tone of this whole debate. But I was with a customer somewhere in Scandinavia who knew that I was about to buy something. And he said, no, don't do that. Have a listen to this. And he took me back into the world of hi-fi separates, and I hadn't really been in it, I hadn't even thought about it for a long time. And I will always remember it, because it was the whole cliche of it sounds better when you separate a system. And yeah, I heard the music for the first time, and I had that tingle, and I had this, you know, hairs on my arms went up and stuff. And I do remember it. But I did worry about how do we get people to understand that that exists out there, and there's this whole world of good enough. And is good enough an enemy? I don't know if it really is, but it is definitely the barrier. But I remember that day because it probably drives most of the discussions I have with the team at Cambridge about how do we cut through this.
James?
For me, there's kind of two moments that stand out, but they were probably later on in life, to be honest. I grew up as a classical musician for a long time, like when I was at school, and then was still performing professionally in classical music for a long time. And recording classical music is incredibly hard, particularly the more people that are involved in performing it. And more often than not, when there's a symphony orchestra involved and a large-scale choir, it was almost always recorded in concert halls. So you ended up with actually very average, very linear recordings. And it's a friend of mine, Steve Long, who's the managing director of Floating Earth. If you've seen any audio production on the TV, he's probably helped with it because he owns one of the few trucks in the UK, so he does the audio production for the Brits and several other large-scale music events. With the choir that he had on his label, called Tenebrae, with Nigel Short, they decided to take their choirs into churches and record them in surround. So it wasn't anything that was massively, I would say, innovative on the tech side, but it was just something that was really thinking carefully about how the listener was going to experience the music afterwards. And after that, now a lot of people have moved out of concert halls since then because the quality of the audio was so much better. So that was one. And the second one was when I got to experience the MQA setup. Pete Downton invited me when he was still at 7 Digital to go and see the setup that they had there. And I heard some beautiful jazz music on the setup there, and that was also pretty cool. So they were the two for me.
When I joined the industry, before I went freelance, so 25 years ago, I joined the tech industry. I worked for a magazine called ERT, which was a business-to-business magazine for electrical retailers that's still going. And I went to hi-fi shows. I mean, I grew up. I was born in '74, so I'm a kid of I'm not Gen Z. I had cassettes, I had CDs. I didn't really have. I sort of missed the vinyl thing because I was a bit too young. But obviously, I just listened to it to music on inferior kind of quality stuff. And then I started going to hi-fi shows, and brands invited me to kind of listen in listening rooms, although they never wanted to play the music that I liked. It's like, put your CDs away, we want to listen to Hell Freezes Over by the Eagles again, and Norah Jones and Dark Side of the Moon. Come on, man, get with it. But it was like, I think when people give you music that you can hear on, like Charlie said, on the really good system, and music that as well. Like I had an experience with MQA as well. They played me a Wilco track. I love Wilco, but I generally heard stuff I had never heard before on this, on the format, on a decent system. So obviously, being a journalist, I never had to afford a decent system, but some people have very kindly loaned me systems, and they sound great. But yeah, I mean, it's an education process, and I had to I couldn't do it until I joined the industry, and then people paid me to listen to music, which was great.
Yeah, for me, I think it was a pretty personal experience. So I grew up singing, and it was really when I started going into recording studios that I really started being aware of sound and the importance of high quality. I think it was just before high school, and then in high school and college, I'd go in and have these experiences with engineers and use different microphones and try out different placements and hear different tones from my voice. And it was very personal, so it made a really big impact. And then I'll never forget going home after the recording sessions, and the engineer would send me the file, and I'd listen probably on laptop speakers first. And after having listened in the studio and then listening on the laptop speakers, I was so disappointed with how I sounded, and I was like, oh my gosh, that doesn't sound anything like it sounded. And then I'd put on headphones, which weren't even very high quality headphones, but it sounded so much better, and I'd send the files to friends and family and say, make sure to listen with headphones. So I think that was really the experience that made me so aware of it and made me really prioritize it moving forward.
I mean, I guess I grew up listening to a lot of stuff that I'd ripped off LimeWire, so like anything high quality was kind of out the window for me until, much like you, Rachel, we had a recording studio at our school. Where we'd kind of just go in there and listen back to whatever bad recordings we'd made, or listen to the good recordings that we'd heard. And our teacher at the time showed us multi-tracks of an old of Stevie Wonder, Superstition. You could download the original multi-track, so we were listening back to it like as it was to be heard, which yeah, and you could solo it as well and listen to each individual bit, and it was just like mind-blowing to hear it in that that width and that depth. So that kind of led me into learning more about music production, and as a result, kind of not so many LimeWire downloads, I guess.
So effectively, hearing that changed your entire career, because now you're writing about it for a living.
Yeah, I guess so, yeah.
Right. You see, that's the way that listening to stuff and changing your mind can change things. Okay, so you're obviously all converts, and you all work in and around, you know, the music business, and you know, you all appreciate what the difference this can make. How does that affect how you talk to friends and family, people not in the industry? You know, how do you get that message across to them without them thinking, well, you would say that? I'll start again.
I guess I'm a bit spoiled. I've got some good gear at home. And if people come around and they, you know, are spending any time at home, I let the music do the talking. I'll put the music that we know and like, and it isn't going to be, you know, the Eagles, unless Sean's coming around, in which case I will. And I think that does a lot of it. And people are like, oh, wow, okay, I get it. I see why you do this. All right, that's amazing. I think language is important. There's a lot of, forgive my French, but a lot of bullshit in our industry. There's a lot of smoke and mirrors. There's a lot of navel gazing that goes on. I think we try and buck the trend with what we do. We were at a Munich high-end show that probably many people in this room are familiar with, which is kind of the ground zero, if you like, well, I was going to say the music industry. I wish it was, of the audio industry. And there was a reviewer who came up to us and just said, "It's so cool you're playing proper music. Isn't it a shame that you guys are a niche at a music show?" And that has really resonated with me. It's like, yeah, let's get back to the music and get people listening to music they know and love. Then they'll pick out the things because they've heard a track a million times. And they'll be like, oh, yeah, okay, this sounds different. And guess what? That's where the bug starts.
I'm actually going to go and mix it up a bit, because I'm particularly interested in Sam's answer to this, because he's actually talking to, you know, a lot of people in his generation who are, you know, I think, you know, when people know that you're in the industry and they know what you do and you've got a good system, it's maybe a bit easier. But we talked a lot, Sam, about, you know, a lot of your friends aren't necessarily into it and it can be a bit of a harder sell. So how do you manage that?
Yeah, I think a lot of it might be down to just sort of like, you know, when friends come round, I've got a collection of vinyl and 2 turntables that we, you know, if we have a few drinks, then we'll obviously DJ on them. And I think that that's kind of like an easy way in, because I think at that point you're kind of actually playing with the music, and, you know, you don't have to have vinyl to DJ, but it kind of looks cool and it sounds good, and it's kind of, it requires a bit more skill. So I think that's one way that I've kind of like had conversations with people about more hi-fi audio, is like actually playing the music together with them, and enjoying it, and them being like, oh, this sounds really good. It's like, yeah, no kidding.
Do you think it's changed anyone's mind? Have you some of your friends gone out and bought stuff, or?
Actually, yeah. I have one friend that's started DJing off the back of it, and he's not very good, but he'll get there. I'm just kidding. He's not going to see this, is he? Who knows? But you know, he doesn't have.
It was a nice friendship while it lasted.
Yeah. I mean, it's that's like digital DJing as well. But there's always this desire to sort of, I guess, level up into vinyl, which is kind of a good thing, particularly as it eventually will hopefully give more money to the artist, but will also sound a lot better for the people that are in the room.
And Rachel, what's your experience of trying to explain to friends and family what it is you do, and, you know, what is Go-Buzz that they might not have heard of, and why is it different? How do you have that conversation?
Yeah, I mean, for me, I usually start by just saying, how do you listen to your music? And get all sorts of answers, you know, across different ages. Usually with younger generations, I find it's usually Spotify is the answer. And then basically try to explain, yeah, I mean, it's usually a conversation surrounding what I do and how they listen to music, and explaining Go-Buzz by comparing it to the streaming services they use, the ways they listen to their music. And really, I think language is really important, and just trying to explain it in very simple terms. You know, the music that you're going to listen to on a lot of streaming services is going to be very compressed. It's not, you know, it's a file that's compressed from the way it's recorded in the studio, and on Go-Buzz it's just the, you know, same file that comes from the studio. It's not compressed, and it's very simple. It's really very simple in explaining it in plain terms. And I think for me, I mean, I'm the marketing director at Go-Buzz, so I say, why don't you try a free trial? So, you know, that's a way that I can explain the difference, at least within streaming services.
And Sean, obviously, you go to a lot of gigs, you know, and you talk to. I see a lot of pictures of you with, you know, other people that you go to gigs with and all of that. Do you ever talk to them about, you know, how they listen at home, or does that ever come up, or is it all about that experience? Do you ever have that kind of conversation?
I mean, I guess, yeah. A lot of my friends are tech journalists, so we're kind of it's talking shop, really, isn't it? Or talking shit potentially as well. But I don't know. It's kind of like. It's interesting to hear these guys talking about like demonstrating. I basically, no one comes around my house because I've got 2 4-year-old twin boys. So no one comes around our house to listen to music. We don't have dinner parties or anything. So I've kind of feel very sad that I've lost that part because I haven't got time to listen to, you know, I had for work, but I can't sit around, you know, people don't come around and put on an album, and it's just not going to happen. So most of the conversations I have are with now people like, you know, working with Cambridge with Charlie and Stuart and people, or going to gigs. But then everyone I know, you know, who goes to gigs tends to talk about, you know, the quality is, you know, is important. And I think we also talk about it on the podcast as well, because we ask people how they listen to music as well, you know. So we had guests, we have Matt Berry, Boy George, you know, a lot of these guys do actually buy and listen to vinyl as well. But they also stream. Some people, you know, listen on CD. I think that's been quite interesting that it's kind of diverse. Obviously, we haven't had any Gen Z, as I say in America, on the podcast yet, but that'll be interesting because it tends to be people of a certain demographic who will buy vinyl and listen to it and collect records and stuff. So yeah, I mean, it'd be interesting to talk to some people who you know, who go to different types of gigs than I go to, because most of the gigs I go to there are not many young people at those kind of gigs. Sad, miserable old men who like Americana.
And James, finally to you, how do you communicate your love of like higher quality to like your wider friends and family circle?
Yeah, I think it's changed as I've got older, and now like at 31, like one thing that's I think still pains me the most is that people still don't want to pay for music, period. Some of my friends. So actually, I think sometimes we forget that everybody's on their own journey when it comes to listening to music, and us as people who are super fans of music, our role is to make sure that people are just a little bit more interested and a little bit more invested in it, and that's different for everybody. So my friend Will, who I'm going to call out and shame here, he still doesn't use Spotify or anything else. He still shamelessly downloads his music and rips it off YouTube and all kind of different services. And my role is to really, you know, make sure that now he's on my Spotify family plan, he's still not paying for it, but somebody is paying for his subscription. That's already progression for him. Whereas for somebody who I know is really interested in DJing, has got their own setup at home, but is using computer speakers to hear their mixes, it's probably not the best. So the conversation will be slightly different for that person. So I think we also need to maybe get off our high horses a little bit and not talk to everybody the same. And the other thing is that not everybody is boxed into a corner. So if you like vinyl, it doesn't mean that you also can't open TikTok and watch really trashy performance content the next day of a gig, because sometimes actually when I listen to the live stream back, it hasn't got the person shouting in my ear who was screaming at the time, and actually the video on my phone's got a little bit more of a special memory attached to it. So we can listen and consume music in lots of different ways, and yeah, not high res is not for everybody, and that's also okay.
I think, you know, you can somehow equate it to food as well. You can have, you know, go to a Michelin-starred restaurant and really enjoy it, but you know, if you want a Mackie D's and you want a Mackie D's, that's what you want right now. So, you know, it's about how you consume. Pivoting slightly to talk about price, because a lot of people say that, you know, price is a barrier to younger people getting into higher quality audio. And yet we can see by the price of gig tickets, again, something you've very closely involved with James as well. You know, people are willing to pay for experiences. So is the price thing an issue, or is that at the moment? I'm going to start with you, even though you just started.
Yeah, no. And I'm kind of tired of hearing about price. Like, it's been going on now for years, and like, just look at the cost of Beyonce tickets at the moment. You know, people are willing to pay for stuff if it's good. We were talking before about Skull Candy, but just think about when Dre headphones came out, how much they were costing the Beats at the time. They were really expensive. PlayStations, again, really expensive. Xbox One, really expensive. So the idea that people aren't willing to spend on something that is important to them is just purely factually incorrect, and it's actually quite lazy, I think. I think where we need to improve as an industry, and particularly like for us that work in marketing, is improving the attachment that people have to that product or experience. So if it's speakers at home, how does it improve whatever you listen to at home? But more often than not, it's the fact that, and we talked before this panel about the fact that there are other variables like space. Now, I live in Amsterdam where the apartments are very small. I also know people in London who don't have living rooms, for example. So when you start marketing home surround setups where the speakers are positioned around TVs and people don't even have a TV in their living room, it's kind of a little bit null and void. And then they have to make a decision about, do we have monitors then to mix my stuff at home, or do I have a home surround sound system? So I think it's a little bit, we've got to think a little bit differently about the fact that people are spending money. It's just about making sure that we can attract them when they want to spend money in a particular time. And actually, lastly, I would say that I just went to a festival in Portugal. It was really interesting. Some of my favorite DJs in the world, Object, DJ Marcella, Palm Tracks, so like lots of different DJs from across the industry. And yeah, the CDJ 3000s have not long come out and hardly anyone was using them. Everybody wanted to still use the 2000s. So there is definitely very much a thing of people looking to the musicians that they love and seeing, oh, at home, what equipment are they using, or knowing a little bit about how that record was made and what equipment went into making that record. And not necessarily about what's new and fashionable out there in the market at the moment.
Rachel, I'm going to come to you next on this one about price, because again, there are cheaper streaming options than Qobuz. It's actually cheaper than people think. It's no more premium to get all of that high-res content than it is to get CD quality from other streaming companies. But you are still convincing people that they need to pay for streaming. And does price come up in conversation much in your world?
Yeah, I think there used to be a much bigger barrier. There was a bigger gap between a high quality streaming service and another streaming service. I think, and I think it's still a barrier for people who don't want to pay for music. It's always going to be a barrier, but for people who are willing to pay something, I think there's much less of a barrier now. I mean, for Qobuz, it's if you have an annual plan, it's $10.83 per month. It's really basically on par with other streaming services at this point. It's really not much more. And I think in terms of the gear too, because it's important. If you really want a high quality listening experience, you have to buy some gear. And I think there are pretty low cost options. So I think if people are willing to spend something, there's really not much of a barrier. I think it's becoming less and less of a barrier.
Sam, have you got anything to add on the price angle? Does that come up when you're talking to your friends about?
Sure. Yeah, I think that high-res streaming services are pretty affordable now in the kind of grand scheme of things, like you say, like $10.83 a month, right? Like that's pretty on par. And I think that there are some brands of hi-fi audio that are like maybe decidedly luxury, which kind of might alienate some people from stepping into that world, even if, like you say, James, things are affordable if you're spending that money on other, like a PS5. But if things are always presented as being, designed in a really luxury and, I don't know, kind of overzealous fashion, then like it can kind of alienate people pretty quickly. And also I think convenience is like, when we talk about streaming services, like most people are probably going to be listening on their phone anyway. So you don't have the tech built in to be able to listen to it full res anyway. So what you need to do is then invest in another gadget to go with your phone. And that could be, potentially another £700 in one case, or, maybe it's as simple as adding an amplifier into your phone, but even that's like a bit of extra money. So it's about trying to like tie in why that should, like if you're looking for convenience, why should you invest in that if all you need anyway is a pair of AirPods and your phone and a £6 plan or whatever. Yeah.
Can still be a barrier, but not necessarily in the most obvious way. Great.
Yeah, I think so.
Sean, I'm going to come to you next because I know, again, you go to a lot of gigs, you spend money on gigs, you spend money on Record Store Day and, all of those sort of things. So again, price isn't a barrier for those, but it might be for actually investing in the better quality audio. Do you think that's about because you've spent all the money on the other stuff? Or?
Yeah, I've got no money left. I spent it all on £35 albums. I think it's interesting. You picked up. I'm just picking up on like you said about how you know. I guess it is still a barrier. I think for some people, but I think also it's the way it's marketed as well. You talked about the luxury thing on hi-fi. I think hi-fi, the phrase hi-fi is old school, isn't it? It sounds dated. It sounds 70s and 80s. It's kind of scary world, the hi-fi world. And I think, for younger people, I think it's the way they're scared off by it. They think the hi-fi is basically old men. It's dads, isn't it? It's old dads or something like from the 70s and the 80s that people, it's like a dark shop, a bit scary, I was just say heavily bearded men, but that includes myself in that. But you know what I mean? It's not an inviting world, I think. And one of the reasons that we kind of, I teamed up with Cambridge to do the podcast is because they are a company that actually it doesn't feel like a hi-fi company. It feels like a music company, or like it's not a hi-fi place. Okay, the tech is really important, but so many hi-fi companies forget about the music. It's all about making black boxes, or silver boxes, and it's about all the fun and the experience of music is stripped out of it, and it's all about, this sounds great. But I think that's what you've got to overcome, because people feel scared by some of it, and it feels like this weird dark art and a weird world that's not a nice place to inhabit.
We'll come on to accessibility later, because I think it's an absolute pivotal point, but I just want to give Charlie a chance to talk about pricing and how you feel about the pricing of things.
So if it's about Gen Z, I've got the luxury of having up to 4 kids at any one time who fit that category in my home. One of whom completely surprised me. He's my son Jasper, and he's 17, and he's been working for the last 3 or 4 months just to pay for his gig tickets and just to go to festivals. And it's been an eye-opener for me. So for him, he's working every hour he's got to spend money on music. Now, I think I'm playing the long game. I think that having people who get into music young, they're going to come around to this later. It's not all about how do we sell premium audio kit to people who are 17, because guess what? I'll be the one paying for it. So I'm not ready for it. But if they fall in love with music now, the job is done. And there's a circularity to the whole world of music. We've got, it's cool to listen to vinyl. Actually, arguably, it's cooler now to listen to CD. And we all know cassettes are going to be coming next, and God knows what, reel to reel, it's all coming. We know it. But that whole it's a fashion thing also matters. I've had my kids, unfortunately, going through raiding my CD collection. I've got much of that left, through my vinyl albums, just to see what's there, because they want to have a play with it. The interest is there, but they haven't got the money for it yet. But if the love is there, it will come.
I'll stick with you, Charlie, because I want to go back to Sean's point, and I want to bring everybody in on this, which is about accessibility of high quality audio in terms of language, in terms of, is it too intimidating? Is it frightening? Do we as an industry use terminology and the way things are presented in a way that just intimidates you? But I'll stick with you first, and then I want to come to Sam, and then I'll go along.
Well, the answer is yes, 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 yes. I came back into, let's say, premium audio about 5-6 years ago, and I remember standing outside an audio retailer whose name will remain nameless, and thinking, do you know what? I don't think I've got the nerve to walk in, because the first thing they're going to do is say, do you want a preamp? Or what? I've forgotten what that is. And you get to my age and you don't want to look like an idiot. So guess what? You don't walk in. That's a barrier. And for my kids, they don't give about all of that. They just want it to sound great. And so I think the language is really important. And we work really hard to just be honest, straightforward, talk about shared passion, the stuff that makes us tick. Have conversations with musicians, see ourselves as in the music industry, not in the audio or hi-fi industry for sure, and just keep it natural, and then I think it'll be good.
Sam, over to you next, because when we spoke, you said that this is one of your real bugbears, is, the use of just language that doesn't make any sense.
Yeah. I guess it's just a numbers thing, isn't it? Like when you talk about lossless or CD quality or anything, it's always judged by the kbps or what bit rate we're listening to, and everything's kind of cut down to a few letters as well. So like just trying to keep on top of that for someone that's not ready to nerd out on it just yet might be a bit difficult. Like it could, I guess that's why things like when you hear the term like spatial audio, it's not telling you the specs of it or what it actually does. You just get the experience of it, and then you understand what it means. And the same with the word lossless as well. It's like you immediately get a sense of what that is without having to know what the numbers are of it. And we see that a lot in like music production as well, and I guess DJing as well, like just everything being made sometimes a little bit more complicated than it should be for people that just want to come in. But I do also think that when people really get hooked into it, they do nerd out, and then that becomes a real point of importance for them anyway. So I guess maybe it's just a case of easier language for the newcomer, and then really opening them up to the technical bits as they flourish in that.
Over to you, James, on this one, because again, I think that was a point that you made as well about the accessibility angle.
Yeah, I also just wanted to say, just on Sean's point, we were talking about vinyl just now as well, and people always use vinyl as like an indicator of how the industry is doing. There's been lots of studies to show that the majority of vinyl that's bought by people under the age of 35 never actually comes out of the casing. So it's not as if it's been bought to consume. It's been bought to replace posters that were on walls in the noughties. So people are buying things for very, very different reasons. And the one thing that I would really like to see more of when we talk about like accessibility, live streaming is such a big thing, and we consume so much music now on demand, particularly video on demand as well through YouTube. And I think if the industry, and there are some artists that do it, they go out their way to explain the setup before, and you get to see actually how they go about recording, or even just recording the performance. If people have a little bit more understanding at that level, then it doesn't really matter on the technical side of the speakers, because people that can then walk into a store and then say, I want this effect, or this is what I need. And really what you need from them is to understand what is their end goal, what's their purpose. Is it that they are listening to music from their record player directly into their sound system? Is it just that they're looking to improve their setup because they're watching live streams and boiler room sets all the time on a Saturday afternoon? So I think that's where I think we can probably improve the accessibility.
Sean, what's your feeling on this one?
Yeah, it's what you said about like the vinyl. You know, people buy it as a kind of like a merch thing. As like I still don't think. I think that people buy like a lot of cassettes, like merch things as well. They don't really listen to them, but it's like people want the whole set, don't they? You know, the vinyl. I think with like vinyl is so expensive now, you know, to buy stuff. Like, I mean, I'll just use an example. Like, I'm a big Depeche Mode fan. I wanted to buy the new record. It's £45 on vinyl. You know, it's not even not even a double album. It is good. It is good.
No, we'll save the fighting till later.
Come on, let's just enjoy the silence, everyone. Thanks.
He's here all week, ladies and gentlemen.
Thanks. No, it's just, yeah, it's expensive, isn't it? I mean, I can't really afford to buy it, to be honest with you. And it's kind of, I think, we had Stephen Street, the producer, on the podcast, yeah, and he said, you know, he's predicting a CD revival. Because there was you talk about, you know, people can't afford to buy a lot of vinyl anymore. It's getting too expensive. What you get for your money as well. Also, you know, you can get CDs are affordable. You can get them really cheap in charity shops. I know it's always the same ones, isn't it? M People, Stereophonics, David Gray's White Ladder, but it's getting better, you know. But you can get decent, you know, CD. I still buy CDs, and some of the stuff I like is not available on vinyl. A lot of smaller bands as well, because of the issues with Record Store Day. You know, we don't need any more yellow splattered David Bowie vinyl that's been 35 quid for an album that no one really wants. I think when smaller bands are really struggling to get their music out and pressed on vinyl because of the demand from, all those big artists who people buy the vinyl. You know, how many people who bought Adele's last album on vinyl actually listen to it on vinyl? Probably not many, but they've got it. I think there's something needs to change so bands can get their music heard, whether that's via, you know, on CD. I think CD will come back. I think Bandcamp is great, what they're doing, Bandcamp Fridays, which is really good. That encourages artists, you know, people to buy the merch from the artists on certain days, so the artists make money. Because let's not forget, it's about the artists as well as the consumers. And the artists aren't making a lot of money, and a lot of my friends are musicians, and they're really struggling to get their music heard out there. The irony is, isn't it? There's so many ways to listen to music, but people are still struggling to get their music heard. And, you know, so something has to change. And I think, yeah, Stephen Street said the CD revival's here. So, you know, good job I didn't get rid of all my CDs, but I've got a lot. Yeah, about
Rachel, what's your view on making things more accessible and how much the accessibility thing and using language that pulls people in?
Yeah, I mean, in terms of language, honestly, when I started at Cobas, there was a lot of new language to me. And, I talked about experiences I had very early on where I did understand the differences in audio quality, and I got it, but I didn't necessarily use the language that, the hi-fi world does to talk about it. And it's something that seems intimidating, and then you realize, a couple months in, it's actually very simple to get a hang of. And that's what I say to anyone who joins our team. Like, oh, don't worry, I didn't understand at first. You'll pick it up in no time. But it is kind of silly when we think about it, because I mean, really, like a lot of people have been saying, it's really just about music, and all you really need is ears and an understanding of music. And I think we really, as members of the industry, need to be sensitive to that in terms of bringing in new customers and in speaking to Gen Z. And one of my colleagues who is kind of right on the verge of Gen Z had said, he thinks TikTok is a really great place where, people within, I don't know what to call them, Gen Zers, people can be having discussions about this stuff without using that terminology, without it being intimidating. And I think also artists explaining to fans, like, those are really the ways that younger generations can be brought in without feeling intimidated.
That's brilliant. That leads me perfectly on to when Sam and I were talking ahead of this. He brought up a point which I really hadn't thought of, which is about older generations gatekeeping the music they love and that sort of hi-fi thing as, this is ours, you wouldn't understand, and that band's not for you, that's my band, not your band. And the stuff that comes up on TikTok that can get people into bands, you then get the fans of that band reacting in a kind of way of like, ooh, hands off my music way. So do you want to expand a bit on that, Sam? Because I found that really fascinating.
Sure. I think on the point of TikTok, I think it's interesting to see how nostalgic younger people are of something they were never there for. Like we spoke about with like Fleetwood Mac, for example, they certainly weren't around when I was growing up, but that's, Dreams is now the song that I play when I want to test out my sound system or whatever. And those things are found through TikTok, and also the sort of feelings you get when you experience something like, watching a bit of footage on film that was recorded on film rather than on an iPhone. Like, there are people on TikTok actively looking at ways to edit their photos, edit their videos, to be nostalgic. And there's also videos of people putting on a record and listening to their hi-fi system, and it's really attractive in that way. So I think if you get into the right pockets of social media, that you'll find that a lot of Gen Z is actually very nostalgic. And on the point of gatekeeping, I guess, I think it's there in any niche, really. There will always be people that are so passionate about what they've found and what they've built up and what they've invested in terms of time and money, that having someone come in that is new and sort of rage in is like, kind of like, this is my space. But not my space. R.I.P. But obviously, like, the danger of that, particularly with something like, hi-fi, is that it could very quickly, that kind of gatekeeping could very quickly lead to people just ignoring it. And when you have the convenience of like I said, like just AirPods and Apple Music or Spotify or whatever, when you have that convenience of that exists, and it's easy for me to go, why would I bother going into this world where I feel like alienated immediately, and people are trying to keep you out. It's just a turn off. And I think it's true of any niche, but like, I think everyone here is really here because they love audio and they love music and they want to share that, which is great. So I just think, making sure that carries on kind of takes the onus off of Gen Z a little bit, but puts it back on everyone else and being like, hey, we need to, share what these experiences are like in listening to something hi-fi and, digging things out of record collections and figuring out what can, finding these little gems and hearing how that feels and getting that hit of nostalgia while being, 50 years too late.
I'm going to open this up to whoever wants to comment on that, because I think it may be something not everybody wants to comment on, but
I want to jump straight
Charlie,
in
I
on
know
that.
you want to.
But in a sort of supportive way. So I've long held that TikTok is, certainly for my kids, is where they're finding out their music. It's what's trending tracks. That's what they start listening to. And there's some weird stuff that my daughter's been listening to now. And I think that's amazing because TikTok does a job. You know, they're not going on to a streaming service. They're finding it through the content that's coming through that way. And guess, you know, the algorithm serves that. But I'm really sad to hear that there's this sense that some people try and protect their music because, all right, I'm not, you know, I'm in my 50s. I'll put my hand up to it. But I've been listening to music when I was a teenager, which, guess what, was already 30 years old. And I thought I was hearing it for the first time. It's not like cover versions are anything new. And I get a real thrill out of it, actually, when my kids are coming along going, oh, I like this tune. And it's like, as though they've heard it for the first time. It's like, yeah, fuck, awesome. Because that is a fucking good piece of music. That is the timelessness of it. Yeah. So it shouldn't be gatekept. That's really sad.
I think we saw
okay.
a bit of that with the Stranger Things Kate Bush
exactly.
situation of like, oh, look, they're just discovering Kate Bush. You know?
Exactly.
And great, because it's, well, as long as it's not at a hi-fi show, it's great. You know, it's great music. And it just keeps on coming back. It's brilliant.
It's the same with Aphex Twin as well. Like a lot of his music has become the backdrop for a lot of like viral trends. And, you know, in some places, mainly Reddit probably, you see people that are like, oh, great, they're only just figuring out who Aphex Twin is. And it's like, well, you got to give them a chance. Otherwise, they'll never figure it out. You know what I mean?
Yeah. I've been desperate to try and look cool in front of my kids with a podcast, all right? A lot of the people we've coming through are kind of an older generation, but one of them is Norman Cook, Fatboy Slim. Guess what? That was cool because he's still playing festivals. So guess what? My son's like, oh, wow, that's cool. And he's been around making music since as long as I can remember. It is really important.
Because I write for various magazines and have my music website as well. I interviewed, Richard Hawley, the singer-songwriter, and he, he's a big vinyl fan. He's quite known for his sort of 50s imagery and stuff. And he said that I was talking to him about buying records. He's had a compilation album out and he's about vinyl. And he's got an 18-year-old son, and he basically said his son wanted to go and buy a record player for his girlfriend's birthday, and he said. Didn't ask his dad because he was too scared to ask his dad. Didn't a Mercury Award nominated songwriter. Didn't want to ask his dad. Didn't want to see it uncool. Went out and bought a picnic style hamper record player. Other brands are available. No names mentioned, Crosley. But he went out and got it. And he said, Dad, my girlfriend said it sounds rubbish. And and they took it back to the shop and bought something else and I think that's a real problem. It's educating people, younger people. It is this fear thing, isn't it? They think, but if someone guided them through it, and without, there's retro kind of cool, isn't there? But then there's also stuff that doesn't sound very good, and that's an education process as well. And that is, it's just interesting. That's probably the last conversation I had, probably about selling music to a young person. But that's just an observation. But I thought it was quite interesting to, he wouldn't go to a hi-fi shop, an 18-year-old kid, would he? He wouldn't go anywhere near one.
We just talk about TikTok there, and like Jack Harlow's just had a massive hit, First Class, which most people who listen to it don't realize that was originally a Fergie song. And the thing is like, does that really matter? Like, does it really matter that piece of information never reaches the listener? In the end, Fergie signed off, or somebody signed off on that sample being used. She's making money off it, so she's pretty grand from that side. I think there's always this culture of we want to say to people, we know a little bit more than you do. And that's not just a music thing. That's just generally how it goes. But let's not forget that a very talented 76-year-old man just headlined Glastonbury with 100,000 people and about 5 generations of people. So I think it's absolutely impossible to gatekeep, and anybody who thinks that they can gatekeep is just going to make themselves look pretty uncool. So just don't do it.
Rachel, just to bring you into this, because again, one of the things that Qobuz does that's a bit different to the other streaming services is you have a magazine, you have a hell of a lot of information on there. Do you think that's one way of people being able to learn more about artists, but without having to ask someone if they're a bit like, oh, I really like this, but I don't really know much about it and I don't want to embarrass myself? Do you think, again, that's something that you've had feedback that's added to things?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, yeah, we have for those who aren't familiar, we have a lot of editorial content. So deep dives into artists and albums and labels and different genres of music, and it's all just about providing context behind the music. So I think I think, yeah, I mean, for people who actually want, it takes a certain consumer, it's a pretty niche consumer that actually wants all of that info behind the music. It's the same type of consumer. It is the same people who are buying vinyl and want to read liner notes and want, we try to have liner notes too. We try to recreate that physical experience as much as possible. So yeah, I think it is a way that people can educate themselves without necessarily asking. But I do think just generally, it's not a music industry issue. It's a life issue. It's people honestly being a bit pretentious and exclusive rather than you would think it's music, it's art. Wouldn't fathers want to share that with their children? When it's really just about, do we want to exclude people or do we want to connect?
Just want to wrap up with another couple of quick questions, one of which is something that Sam picked up on earlier about spatial audio and whether that is something that could appeal, is something that more naturally appeals to younger people because it's something that they hear more often, and if they're listening on various other elements. Is spatial audio something that could be a way to get people into better quality audio, or something that's out of the norm? Anyone want to venture there?
I think it's interesting, but I think it's interesting in a wider context. I think things like gaming, we tend to always talk about music, audiobooks, podcasts, gaming. It's all stuff that people want to immerse themselves in, and immerse themselves in is the operative word there. So yeah, spatial audio gives you a sense of that. So yeah, it's cool, it's interesting. Will it be a fad? Will it be a phase? Don't know. Time will tell. But it's definitely a topic that we debate a lot.
Yeah.
Have something to add on that, I guess, is that it's always going to be about how you listen to that piece of spatial audio. So like gaming is a really good way to get into that, you're right. And audiobooks as well, that's something I haven't considered, but could be really cool if you have like a conversation thing. I think maybe theatres are actually a little bit of a good way to get into this, because when you now go and watch at the right cinema, you go and watch a movie that has Dolby Atmos audio, it's a completely different experience. And it makes you never want to go back to whatever was there before ever again. And like I've listened to some albums in those spaces as well, which is really quite interesting and has a lot of people there and turn out for it. And it does change the listening experience. Sometimes significantly, sometimes it's just nice to be a little bit more enveloped in the sound than you would be normally. I guess the only real experience that is convenient for users at the moment is, again, Apple Music with the sort of head tracking thing, which I don't know how you guys feel about that, but it's kind of one and done. Do you know what I mean? You're kind of like, oh, that's really cool. And then you turn it off and then that's it. So I think that could be a nice way into it if the playing environment is there. And I guess the content, that audiobooks thing is really interesting actually. So that could be a really nice way to introduce that.
James, I can tell you want to.
Yeah. For me personally, I would use it more, I think, for football. Like what was really interesting about COVID is when the stadiums were empty, you heard so much stuff from the bench and from the coaches that you never heard before in football. This was fascinating, more probably than Sky Sports wanted to capture on microphone. But so I'd probably use it in that setup. Again, I mentioned classical earlier. Because it's different how musicians are recorded in classical. You're not individually mic'd, you're group mic'd. So actually having that benefit of having that kind of spatial audio experience is a bit different. But I have actually experienced it sometimes with jazz recordings where it's actually made me feel a little bit dizzy. And I've actually said, no, I would much prefer to have a linear kind of recording. So I think it's a very personal experience, whereas somebody else who loves jazz might say, I want to be in the thick of it and feel like all the instruments are around me. For me, I prefer to have that more linear experience towards it.
Sean, Rachel, you want to add anything on those?
It's interesting because we're talking to, on the podcast, we're talking to producers as well. Some people were really into it and they really like the possibilities of what you can do by remixing an album or, working with artists in the studio and, do the artist then kind of do stuff that they wouldn't normally do in order to do it in Dolby Atmos or whatever like that. But I think if you're doing it for the right reasons, it's a good idea. I think some producers think it's a bit gimmicky still in the industry. I think people are worried by what happened with 3D TV, and it was 3D was a complete disaster, really, because people didn't want all the A, the glasses, but B, the content was rubbish, wasn't it? Let's face it, most of it. And I think if you're doing it for the right reasons and you can enhance the music and it's great and it sounds great, but don't just do whistles and bells for the sake of doing whistles and bells on an album just because it's kind of cool and interesting. It's not really. It's kind of, it suits some artists, it doesn't suit some, and some producers. So I think the industry is still a bit divided on it, and I think it's a bit niche. You know, do we need any more niche stuff? I don't know. We want to widen music industry out to people, don't we, rather than put everyone in their little sort of silos.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with a lot of what everyone's saying. I think one thing that's important to note is Dolby Atmos isn't lossless. It's actually lossy. So, you know, for Qobuz customers, we haven't heard a lot of interest for Dolby Atmos because, you know, even though it's talked about by everyone in the music industry right now and it's become a hot thing, it's not actually high quality audio. So, you know, I agree. I think there's a time and a place, and we don't offer it currently at Qobuz. It's something we might offer in the future, but it's just interesting to, you know, hear how some people are really interested in it and some people aren't. And there are other forms of spatial audio that are, like THX spatial audio is lossless. Yeah.
I'm going to stay with you, Rachel, for our final question, to kick off our final question, which is if everybody's making efforts to engage younger generations in high quality audio and do all of that, how do you risk alienating that more traditional audience who, you know, is quite happy with the way things are, thank you very much. And, you know, how do you manage to balance what they need with new generations coming up?
Yeah, it's a really interesting question. I mean, you know, and for the most part, you know, the hi-fi audio world and Qobuz customers it's still skew much older. So it's really it's new. It's something we're learning, we're figuring out right now in terms of bringing in younger generations. But I think what's really important for any brand or company is really just about staying in your lane, continuing to do what you do best and communicating it clearly, authentically, effectively, not, you know, trying some trendy thing or communicating something just to bring in a new generation that isn't actually authentic to the brand. And especially with Gen Z, who care a lot about authenticity, they're going to pick up on that. And really, at the end of the day, no company wants to do that because you're going to end up with customers that aren't going to stay and aren't going to be loyal and aren't going to appreciate what the brand is about. So I think, you know, for when it comes to high quality audio, you know, if I'm speaking about Qobuz in particular, it's really about communicating our brand values, which are really about the music listening experience, high quality in terms of audio and editorial, human curation, not just algorithms, you know, many other things. But basically communicating those values consistently to all generations, maybe in a little using different language. And I think one other way of looking at it is it's not necessarily about speaking to these different generations, but more just about marketing on different channels and different contexts, which we all already do. So it's like you're going to talk to people differently on Facebook than you're going to talk to them on TikTok. You're going to communicate differently in a print ad than you're going to on a digital ad than you're going to on out-of-home advertising. So, you know, we know that generally Gen Z is not where the older consumers are. So I don't think anyone will feel alienated if the same values are being communicated in different places using slightly different language.
So it's more about positioning than the message changing itself. Sam, what about you? You mentioned earlier about language changing and making accessible language, but then when people get to know things, do you think that it basically is almost like taking people through a journey? Brand needs to take people through a journey?
Yeah, I mean, you don't want to Fisher Price stuff because, like, you know, you want it to be, like you said, you want it to be authentic and you want, you know, it to be translatable across all generations, really. So I guess it is, just to agree with you, I guess it is about staying in your lane and not just creating something for the sake of it being appealing to a younger audience. But if you are going to do that, make sure it's done with genuine authenticity, not just a cash grab thing, and definitely not Fisher Price to the point where they, you know, you then feel stupid for picking up on things, but then also not being alienated by the extreme language of stuff. Does that make sense?
Yeah. That balance.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's That's it.
Sean?
Yeah, so I get. I mean, I would have no idea how to talk to someone. I'm not. I mean, I am on TikTok, but I'm not using it. I wouldn't even attempt to. So I think it is really important that you have to kind of. Yeah, I mean, it's different. Some of it's different for different target audiences as well. I think what's interesting, you mentioned things like the curating thing, which I think is great, and you also said like artists as well. If artists can talk to their fans, you know, about why they record in that way, why they do that. That's really interesting. I think that can hook younger people in and talk to them in a way that they relate, especially if it's younger artists talking to people of the same age as them. I also think what's interesting, you talked about the liner notes as well. I think that, I mean, I'm the sort of person who likes to buy records because I like to know who played bass on track 3 or whatever, or keyboards and that. But not everyone's like that. But I think there's an opportunity on the podcast. We talked about that as well, with trying to hook people in, trying to recreate some kind of physical format that is maybe not vinyl. But could you, Stephen Street again, so to go back to him, but he talked about maybe kind of getting CDs, but with like vinyl artwork. So you get a CD, but it's got the vinyl artwork. So you got all the line notes, the nice art, and you can see that if people want to physically hold it. So I think that's important as well. It's about trying to create, as you say, different, trying to put all the different people you could target in music. And I think it's about getting the language right for each of those. And don't try and patronize younger people, but then also don't try and make people like me feel completely out of touch.
James?
Yeah, I mean, in the last, my most recent role was head of brand marketing at TicketSwap, which is an ethical resale platform for live music tickets. They have 10 million users globally. And in my experience there, we worked with over 200 content creators, predominantly on TikTok, all of whom had fantastic speakers at home. So I don't think it's actually true that young people aren't buying great setups. I think the difference is it's not flowing back into your pocket. They're buying them at resale. And I think there's a really, really huge opportunity for an audio brand to introduce and make more of the buyback, because I don't think there is really, like, for example, when we look at how the rest of music sets up recorded music, Universal Music, Warner, Sony all own label services companies that allow artists to have more power, more kind of creative control over their records. It could be that maybe an audio brand actually invests in having a resale supplier, so just dedicated to hiring some mechanics and engineers to give those speakers some love in the same way that kind of Apple do, where we buy a phone, in 2 years, 3 years, we trade back in our other one, which is kind of some money off the next one, and then we buy the next one up. That might actually see people stay with the audio brands longer, because once you get them in that system, they'll stay there. But I think it's a bit of a missed opportunity at the moment, because I think people are probably buying those from friends or from other kind of Facebook Marketplace, wherever else.
That's a really interesting point. Charlie, so over to you finally on that, getting that balance between different types of customers.
Yeah, I just want to pick up on the last point though quickly. So a really fascinating session earlier today about sustainability and what does it mean in terms of circular economy, and it's something that we kind of agonise about. And I think there needs to be a platform where people can trade in older products, give it a new lease of life, go through a journey through products, etc., etc. And so we'll see what we can do with that. You were asking the question already about how do older people feel in the face of all of this.
It's about the balance. If you're trying to
which is why you
appeal.
came to me last, yeah?
Yeah.
I think there is a universal language, which is music. Good music is good music. And I look in the mirror and I still pretend that I'm in my 20s. I think we all do. If we're a certain age, we still feel like we are younger than we actually are, and we're all in denial. And that's okay. And guess what? Music reminds us of all of that. And so I feel just as young. I think for us as a brand at Cambridge, we kind of think about music rather than the kit. And so we're feeling young about the music. And I think our data shows us that we appeal to a music-orientated older customer, but they still feel they're young. That's great. As I say, play the long game, because Gen Z today will be customers tomorrow.
Well, thank you, everybody, for all of your opinions. And I'd like to now open it up if there are any questions from the audience to any of our panel. Anybody got any burning questions, things that have come up, things that you feel that we didn't cover, that we should have covered?
Or when the
Go
bar
on.
opens.
I'm gonna regret trying to talk. I'm very tired. So just thinking about kind of back to the history of hi-fi, and listening parties and listening cafes played quite a big part in growing hi-fi in the first place. And there's kind of resurgence in listening cafes even around London, but around the world they're opening up again. I just wondered whether anyone thinks that putting better quality equipment in more visible and the right kinds of places can have any impact?
I could probably take this one because I've worked with quite a few festivals and clubs in the last couple of years. They've actually really pride themselves in their marketing on talking about their sound systems, and it always comes back around because if people have had a great experience at a festival, 8 times out of 10 now, people, at really kind of high-end festivals, people are looking at where the speakers are and what the manufacturers are of the speakers. So I think it's more at the live music level. It might be slightly different to the format that you're now talking about, but I think if people can experience and learn about those speakers in that live setting, then they're far more likely then to introduce that kind of language in their home as well.
Sam, you want to add? Or go on, Rachel.
I was just gonna say I've seen hi-fi bars popping up like in Brooklyn and a lot of major cities, and it seems to be this, it's the retro new trendy thing, and I think if those types of places, trendy cocktail bars that have hi-fi equipment but aren't necessarily just using that same older hi-fi language, I think that's a really great opportunity for younger generations to come in.
I think as well, just like to add to that as well, I think the interactivity of places like that could really be a bit of a boon as well. Like, as I was saying to you on the phone, Claire, there was a festival in America that kitted out a room with tapes all across the wall, and there was a DJ playing, mixing the tapes together. You could pick out a tape from the wall and give it to the DJ, and then they'd play that. That obviously gives you a completely different feeling when you're actually picking out and putting it onto a hi-fi system. So I think if those things can also be interactive and get people hands-on with that kind of sound and experience, then that would be really helpful as well. I don't know how many of them do that, probably more of them than I'm considering, but I think that'd be a great way to do it.
Any more questions?
I'm not really sure which one of you will answer this, but a lot of music audio brands or youth-orientated brands use a lot of like purpose-driven communication styles, so sort of aligning with an activist or a charity or something like that. How do you feel about brands doing that to sell audio?
As one of those brands who's perhaps doing that, I'm going to go back to the sustainability session earlier. It's about honesty and openness and a realization of we only know what we know so far, and we've just got to start. If we don't start, perfection is the enemy of progress and all that stuff. We are doing what we can at Cambridge. We partner with Brian Eno, who has something called Earth%, which is his take on trying to do Live Aid for a new generation for the music industry to basically get its act together. Live music touring is probably one of the most carbon intensive industries you can possibly imagine. And we are the only manufacturer in that community, which is a kind of special place for us to inhabit. But it also gets us into conversations with people who are having that debate all the time. I was lucky enough to go to something called the Blue Earth Summit as well in Bristol last year. That's the outdoor industry looking at how they deal with it. And guess what? They're probably 5 to 10 years ahead of everyone else because it's the outdoors and it has been affected faster than anything else. And getting closer to other organizations and other communities who are trying to work it out, it just fuels the debate. There's no easy answer. The last session tells us that you can't just have the answer, but we are serious about it. And I think that does matter. It matters, frankly, it matters to us. As a business, it's really, really important. It's not bullshit. It's important. But hopefully that also is mirrored by all audiences. It's not just Gen Z. We're leaving a bit of a shit show for Gen Z behind in some respects, but everybody should be caring about this. It's everyone's responsibility.
I think two sides. One is that we see a lot of brands now desperately attaching themselves to influencers, only to find that influencer has been cancelled a year later because they've said something stupid online. But as a marketer, what's interesting is you very rarely get the best and the most out of that person unless they actually believe in what you're trying to do. So I've worked in the past with influencers, artists, producers, even people close to the industry who you think, oh, that's an artist, they're going to be invested. Sometimes they're not. Sometimes they're just looking for the paycheck because the paycheck's good and they're struggling also to earn money as well. So it's something that I've also learned as a marketer to sometimes say no to people when we have thought that the fit is wrong. But that's something that you kind of have to learn by getting burnt first, and then you realize afterwards, okay, actually it really is about authentic relationships with people, and probably that's why your podcast's so successful, is because you work with good people that come and talk about music and they're passionate about it. And that wouldn't work if people were going to come onto the podcast and just not say anything for an hour, you know? So I think that's authenticity is the most important thing.
That wouldn't be good if they didn't say anything for an hour. But yeah, that would be quite. Yeah, I think it's what Edward says, isn't it? It's like Charlie says, like it's people soon see through all the kind of greenwashing and stuff, and if it's not a right fit for the brand, and it's also it can be a bit cringy, can't it? You know, with charity. It's kind of the wrong message, you know. We don't have to wheel out Sting again, do we, to talk about the jungles again? It's like that. That's what I think of when everything would get. That's what I think of when people talk about eco and sustainability. I still can't get Sting out of my head. But you know, if it's the right opportunity, I guess it's got to work. Because otherwise, it just comes across as being a bit crass, I think, and a bit people don't fall for that, do they? You know, maybe.
Rachel.
Yeah, just the one thing I was going to add is working in the music industry, I think the most obvious cause that makes sense to support is supporting artists. And that gets, tricky with streaming services. And Qobuz has a download store, and just naturally people buying music through downloads or through physical is going to support artists more than streaming. So I think finding ways to and I also think, everyone working in the industry does have to wants to and has to care about artists and their success. So I think that's one way that cause-related marketing makes sense.
Anything to add to that, Sam? Do you feel sometimes you're cynically marketed to rather than genuinely?
Yeah. I say it like it happens every day. It might do without me even noticing. I think just like one sort of collaboration that I saw recently that made a lot of sense was between A-Track and Rain on like a DJing mixer. And, it didn't seem like a real cash grab for either of them. Maybe it was, but it didn't seem like it, at least, because it was sort of designed off of the back of his use of a DJ mixer and their, appreciation of him as an artist. So I think what they made was, it came across as something that was really genuine and looked valuable to the end user as well, and something that they might want to actually align themselves with. I think we see a lot of also like sort of signature models of guitars and stuff like that. So that can also come across as a cash grab as well, but it's all about, maybe not going with the person that seems like they might get cancelled next year. And actually making it a genuine and authentic relationship that makes sense to the audience you're selling to.
Well, I think we maybe have time for one more question, if anybody's got one. Otherwise, we can leave it there. No more? Well, thank you so much to the whole panel. Thanks so much to everybody, and so much to everybody for listening.